Welcome to the Higher Ed Happy Hour podcast, brought to you by Unincorporated, a higher education agency committed to building awareness and growing enrollment for universities. This podcast provides deans, senior admin, and faculty with the tools, resources, and information they need to grow student interest, design branded content, and launch new programs and courses. In this episode, we take a closer look at how artificial intelligence is empowering universities to deliver a better student experience and more effectively manage their operations. To help explore the topic in more detail, Ian recently spoke with David Karandish, who is the founder and CEO of Capacity, an enterprise-level artificial intelligence company.
I'm here with David Karandish, who is the CEO of Capacity AI. We're sitting down today to discuss ways you can leverage AI to bring more flow to your work and ultimately help improve your organization. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So from what I understand, Capacity AI is a platform, a solution, if you will, that can reduce the endless stream of support tickets, all of those annoying rote tasks, and ultimately help you deliver better services and products. Is that correct?
That's right. So we would describe Capacity as a support automation platform. On the support side, we are here to answer as many repetitive questions as possible. On the automation side, we can take on some of the workflows that happen behind the scenes of higher ed. And then the last part is a platform, you can build new solutions on top of Capacity. And so we're here to help just make the support process as easy as possible within education.
I love that. But just to be clear, I guess for anyone, any non-higher ed listener that might stumble upon this could also be applied to other business models, other organizations, other brands as well, correct?
Yeah, so the platform is horizontal, and then we've got vertical integrations in the major categories we're in. Our big categories are financial services, education, software, and healthcare. Okay,
excellent. And I know you have quite a background. Aside from that illustrious background, what has kind of motivated you at this stage in your career to start an AI company and really help solve some of the challenges facing higher ed today?
So I got into internet advertising in the early 2000s and started a comparison shopping engine, ended up buying answers.com, took it private, and then grew it up through to a very successful sale to a private equity firm. But after that, one of the things I realized was that when you get into the early stage of a market that's just about to take off, there's so much fun to be had. There's a lot to learn. And there's an opportunity to go make your mark. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to do next after my last 10-year gig, it was I wanted to get into something where I could learn, something where I could grow, something where I was part of a market that was just starting to take off. And so the AI space checked all those boxes.
So it's the AI space that you feel is a market ready to really explode or grow exponentially, not necessarily the ed tech space or the higher education space that's also, I guess, primed for growth?
I think ed tech is also primed for growth and primed for major disruption. We can talk about that in a little bit. But I don't know of another market that's growing as fast as artificial intelligence. When we started the company just a couple of years ago, it was projected to go from a couple $2 billion to $60 billion by 2025. I looked at it fairly recently, and the same people put on the same projections said, "Oh, guys, sorry, we got that wrong. It's actually going to be 126 billion by 2025." And I would bet that if we looked at it a couple of years out, they'll be like, "Oh, sorry, again, it's actually 180 billion plus by that time frame." I think artificial intelligence it's not a page turn or chapter turn. It's like a throw out the book, rewrite the rules approach to how everyone is going to work and live. And I think the ed tech revolution that's happening alongside it is going to intersect very well.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So let's talk about, I guess, the application or the use case of AI and what Capacity's unique, I guess, flavor of that is. How can Capacity AI or AI, generally speaking, how can it actually help schools, universities, academies? How can it help those institutions really deliver high quality service, or maybe improve the content and the product, the educational content that they're also delivering?
So when I think of AI, I like to first take a half step back and try my best to define intelligence itself. So if you think about it, I'd say everyone intuitively knows what intelligence is, but it's actually kind of difficult to define. My definition of intelligence would be that intelligence is the ability to recognize and apply a pattern. So you could have business intelligence, you could have mathematical intelligence, musical intelligence, vocal intelligence. There's a story about LeBron James a few years back where he was calling the plays of the other team because the guy on the other team wasn't standing in the right place in the middle of the play. So obviously he has a great basketball IQ. But if intelligence is the ability to pick up a pattern and go apply that pattern, then artificial intelligence is the ability for software to do the same kind of thing. And so if we think about where this specifically can intersect with the world of EdTech, one is just answering the myriad of questions that students and parents and faculty have. Anything from how do I apply for a scholarship, to I want to transfer this class, to when does the club soccer team meet? All these types of questions are questions that typically would have to go to a person in an organization like a university. Oftentimes that is very decentralized. You don't really know who to go to. And so what we are doing with Capacity is we're saying, okay, time out. What if you could place an AI-powered bot on your website? It can answer your questions, and then any question it can't answer, it will intelligently escalate that up to the appropriate person based on the category that the question is in. And so when we started, I'm going to say that, January 2017, we had about a 55% match rate. So about half the questions that you ask Capacity could match to it. Today we're at just over 90%. So 9 out of 10 questions you ask to Capacity, we're going to give you an instant response to. And we have a 98% positive feedback rate in terms of folks liking the answers that come back. And so our whole idea is that the first place we can go make a big dent in improving the educational experience is in being able to answer student, parent, and faculty member questions. The second area is that if you think about all of the workflows that happen behind the scenes within a school, anything from transferring a student in to setting up all of the effectively internal marketing campaigns around registration, classes, and all the things that happen there, all the way up to how do we help our most at-risk students go achieve their educational goals? How do we figure out who is in that bucket? So we've got some workflows that we've done across a couple of our different schools where we're doing things like automating the onboarding experience, helping student advisors and or life coaches do a better job of targeting the students that they want to go reach out to. So very high level, you could think of Capacity as answering as many questions as we can, automating as many workflows as possible, and then ultimately giving you the tools to go build whatever new solutions you'd like on top of the platform. That's great.
And I love the fact that you simplified, I guess, the two main kind of primary buckets, one being around workflows and automating that, and then the other around Q&A or kind of intake in terms of questions or prompts that are coming into an organization or an office. So we'll dig into each of those, I think, individually. Coincidentally, I was just on a call this morning with what is referred to as a restart team. And this is a dean's cabinet, so senior administration level at a major university, talking about the number of times they have to send the same email out, like manually draft and send the same email out, because it's this pattern that you mentioned in terms of intelligence, this pattern of questions that continue to come in at different times of the year, different semesters, different peaks, ebbs and flows. And if we could solve that, if we could add Capacity, now I kind of see where the name comes from. If we add Capacity to the areas that are actually more meaningful work and decrease kind of the burden of this Q&A process, That's a big win. That's a big win across the board. I guess I'm curious how this might differ from maybe a knowledge base or an FAQ set on your website. Like, how is this different than search?
Great question. So search has its place, and we're big fans of search, but there are a couple of major limitations to the way most knowledge bases and most search platforms are set up. Issue number one is that people tend to think of knowledge bases, information goes in and it never really comes out. So it wasn't designed to have an expiration date. It goes in and stuff gets stale and doesn't get cleaned up well. So one of our guiding principles when we built out our knowledge bases, we said every single question should be able to have a start and end date. So you can tee up content that will kick in the new semester. You can also have content that automatically expires when that time is over. So that's just general purpose hygiene that we like to start with. The second thing, though, is that search does a really bad job when you've got contextual answers, when you've got follow-up questions you need to ask to clarify or to help winnow through the various options. You might have a very different answer if you're a part-time student or a full-time student, or depending on if you're on, say maybe you're in the military, or maybe you're an adult online versus campus in person. So all of these types of contextual pieces are fed into what we would call a guided conversation, which makes up a good chunk of the experience that you have on the Q&A side. And then lastly, what I would say is search typically ends up restricting to a set of knowledge within that search system. So you have a knowledge base, you can search the knowledge base. There's capacity, you can think of it as a system of engagement that sits across all of your key systems. So we can search knowledge base and website and Canvas and Salesforce and pick whichever systems of record you end up using.
Great. So there's a higher level of engagement. The information and the access to the information remains current. So there's like a hygiene thing that you mentioned that is part of this, but you're also inferring that it doesn't necessarily replace search. It maybe ties together all of the other platforms where knowledge or information exists, and then kind of layers in or works, I guess, in a more collaborative way with other processes that you might already have in place.
Yeah, let me say it another way. Your search is a component of the experience, but if it's just search, then you're missing out on a richer, more engaging experience that you can have. Another example that we didn't talk about is how if you do a search and you don't find your answer, you're usually pretty SOL. With Capacity, if you ask your question, Capacity doesn't know the answer, you can immediately thumb that down, and we can bring someone in via live chat handoff and take you directly into a conversation with a human. So it's just kind of graceful escalation from level 0 support up to level 1. Alternatively, if you don't have someone available in a live chat, we can still go create a ticket in our help desk. But when someone on that end goes in and responds to that, they're not just responding to that ticket once. Every response gets stored back in the knowledge base. So the next time anyone else in the school has that question, it doesn't have to go back into somebody's email inbox. It's now instantly responded to. So it's this learning component and the escalation component that differentiates what we're doing from just pure play search.
I see. Yeah, and that was going to be a follow-on question, is how this might support or differentiate from universities and schools that are using now like a student ambassador to be on the other end of a chatbot. And I guess in a way it could escalate to the point where you're actually engaging with a real life human. But do you think that this is superior in some way than having, say, a group of student ambassadors that are just on standby to chat and engage with prospective students?
So we're not trying to replace student ambassadors. I think there will always be a place for someone to want to talk with a real person. But there's a subset of use cases, whether it's the time of day, whether it's the simplicity of the question, whether it's someone who's on mobile, maybe they don't have time to go do a full live chat. There's always going to be a scenario where all you want is just a quick answer to your question, where bringing someone and getting them involved, it's just not the ideal experience. At the same time, we don't think of it as either or. We think of it as both and. You want to have your great human experiences for things that humans are good at, and you want the bot to be there to answer as many questions instantly as possible. So it's really a both and, not an either or.
Yeah, that's good. I was grateful to hear that response, because I don't think people are ready to throw out their student ambassador initiatives or that tactic altogether. I mean, it really helps with nurturing engagement, conversion, when you have those advocates really speaking on behalf of the school's brand. Does the bot itself, I'm just curious, does it feel like you're talking to someone else? Does it, I mean, you mentioned that intelligence is being able to recognize a pattern. And if you are sophisticated enough at recognizing those patterns and the inflection in those patterns, then it starts to feel like empathy. It starts to feel like a human interaction. Does it feel human?
It feels as human as anyone's technology is today in this space. And obviously there are limitations. But that said, we want to actually call out that you're talking to a bot. We don't want you to think you're talking with a human and you're not talking with a human. But we do a lot of human-like things. So if we don't know the answer, we'll tell you, hey, I don't know the answer to that. Let me get someone else involved. If we think we know the question, but we're not quite sure, the bot will actually come back and clarify for you and say, did you mean this, this, or this? And when you make a selection, it'll go back and remember that for next time. We recommend the bot being as colloquial as your university would normally communicate. So if you're maybe a friendly, large state school, it should reflect your values. And if you're a small liberal arts college with much better grammar than I have, then it should reflect that, right? So you want the bot to reflect the personality of the institution itself.
That's great. So in a way, you could think of the way that you're branding your school, the way that your school is positioned in terms of mission, vision, values, brand persona, brand personality. You can actually have capacity as an extension of that brand position, if you will.
Yeah, it's almost a digital brand ambassador.
Yeah, that's great. Sign me up. It sounds like a perfect addition to add to any major college or university. Does it take a long time to onboard and get it installed and kind of connect your Salesforce to, I don't know, maybe it's a SharePoint, Salesforce integration that you're working on?
So if we sign with the university today, we can get capacity in your hands, testing, answering questions within 30 days or less. So it's not this big 6-month rollout sort of thing. Now, we've got over 85 different applications that we've integrated with, anything from SharePoint to Salesforce to you name it. If there's an app we haven't connected to, we have a developer platform, and either we can go build that integration out, or if you've got developers to build that out, that works too. So we might not have that on day 30, but within the base of the knowledge base and the apps that we work with, we try to get this rolled out, again, first 30 days, 45 days max.
Nice. And I'm assuming this lives on the front end of the experience on a website typically, right?
It's literally one little line of JavaScript you can go put on your website, your mobile app. It's responsive. So if you have a responsive design site, it can adjust for that. But we can also plug in for faculty members. We have a plugin for Slack. We've got a plugin for Microsoft Teams. We are working on an SMS version, so you can text the bot and it'll text you back. So multiple modalities. We would call those interfaces. Wherever you are, the bot can be.
Very cool. Yeah, let's speak a little bit on the faculty need and the faculty's experience. It's pretty clear that from an administrative standpoint, this could be really helpful in terms of recruitment. So thinking about recruitment and advancing the endowment of a university, that could also play a role. But for the faculty member who may, I don't know, let's say have a long archive or a large library of knowledge that they're trying to include in their course, is this something that would actually aid in the educational experience as well?
Yeah, so we've had capacity be kind of a TA helper for various classes. So you can have it answer questions on your behalf. You can have capacity take on some of the workflows and processes behind the scenes. So we were working with one university where if you wanted to drop a class, it took about 9 weeks to process, which is a long time. That was for their campus environment. For their online environment, it also took 9 weeks to drop a class, but their online classes were only 8 weeks in length. And so you literally would not know if your class was successfully dropped until the class was over, which just did not.
Classic. Yeah.
And so we're taking processes like these and helping to just make it as efficient as possible by coordinating between all the people that need to be coordinated, and then taking the people out who don't need to be sending emails and checking inboxes for this sort of thing.
Wow. It sounds like a promised land, like a mecca, if you will, an oasis of just staying in your flow, whether you're a faculty or an administrator, staying in that workflow of where you really add a lot of value to your day-to-day and removing more of that redundancy that you see that can be automated and also built into this AI. I'm thinking about the fact that you might have the chance to differentiate from other universities. Do you feel that capacity in some ways is actually helping universities reposition themselves or differentiate from their competition as well?
Oh, absolutely. We have universities that use us extensively on their recruiting, where they're like, look, we have a digital bot that helps us make this place more efficient, more effective. We've had some organizations we work with that haven't hired capacity out of their tech budget. They actually hired capacity out of their hiring team budget. And they said, hey, this is like a new team member we've brought on. So that the differentiating position of bringing this technology in is something that we definitely help universities have the benefit for.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your experience so far with, I guess, onboarding and recruiting new universities to sign on, do you need to be a certain shape and size? Is it, made for that, as you mentioned, like that small liberal arts college, or do you need to be a major player in the university industry?
No, and we've worked with everything from top 20 undergrad program to kind of a fast growing community college to the second fastest growing kind of hybrid university in the United States. So we've got a good mix of size. We've also done work with going down even outside of higher ed, but going into things like school districts. We've got a school district bot with one of our clients where we're answering K through 12 questions for parents and for faculty members. And so we're also working with a couple of the OPMs in terms of the folks that power the experiences for these online programs. So we've got a good mix of different schools and school adjacent, higher ed adjacent organizations. Yeah,
that makes sense. And that also makes me think, does this kind of fit within a tool set for an agency, or are you more like B2B going directly to the university and to those key decision makers? Or do you find that you're kind of leveraging the agency university or the OPM university relationship as a way to kind of move this tool into that ecosystem?
We're finding opportunities on both ends. So wherever we can get the fastest introduction to the appropriate folks is a good place for us. So both directions is good.
Nice. What are some of I just wanted to come back to workflows because you mentioned that earlier. What are some other use cases in terms of workflows, adding and dropping a class? I think you also mentioned maybe registration or possibly some onboarding experience, whether it's on the faculty side or maybe a new student coming into a new school or department. What are some other workflows that you've seen are really good cases where you could bring this in and add capacity?
Yeah, a good example, I'll double click on the onboarding piece. So one of the universities we work with, they recognize that if they could get a bigger proportion of their online undergrad students to get all the way through their orientation, those students tend to have better academic outcomes down the line. And so what you find is that sending them an email the day before might not be the best way of engaging with some of these students. And again, different populations. You can't just all go down to the quad and play hacky sack and tell people when the next orientation meeting is. These are working adults. These are folks who are trying to go back and get their undergrad degree, sometimes at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And so what we did is we helped build a workflow that would send an automated response all the way through an SMS to these students, and then track each week who's gone through which parts of the orientation. And if you've gone through it, great. And if not, We can send you other follow-up marketing messages to get you through that process. We've had phenomenal success with just that one particular workflow. We're now using a lot of the same underlying ingredients that we use for the onboarding workflow to go help some of the life coaches, where they're like, hey, we want to know if we've got X many thousand students that we need to think about. There might be a smaller subset that are most at risk, most likely to drop out, most likely to not get the academic success that they were hoping for. Let's figure out how to separate the chaff from the wheat and then send the right message. So if Susie is an A student, gets a C- in physics, maybe it was just a hard physics class or something like that. But you got Bob over here who's got a 2.9 GPA. His grades are dropping. He might have gotten the same grade, but man, his overall GPA, like he's got C-, but he's got 2 Ds and an F. Like all of a sudden, you're going to have a very different level of intervention. It's very analogous to the personalized medicine concept that we're starting to drive toward, where we're being more interventional rather than reactive.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned we could think of this as a digital TA, but in a way it's a digital like guidance counselor or career advisor, something that is really going to bat for the student and identifying some of those risks, so we could play a more preventive role, or in some ways maybe empower the student by coaching them through the places where they're stuck. I really love that, because I think that can help not only with student retention, but helping support learning outcomes and career placement and graduation rates. Like this AI, from what it feels like, Capacity has its capacity to really help improve the standards across the board. And if you believe that education is the means of ascension for society, I mean, dare I say that Capacity is helping society ascend? Can we go that bold?
I'd go that bold. Absolutely.
Nice. All right, a couple more questions. I know I just have you for a little longer here, but you mentioned this business strategy called variable elimination. What is that? Can you tell us about that?
I think when you start an organization, it's very different starting a company than your typical educational experience. So I was good at math. I like math, but in math, you usually know what your variables are, and you're starting out with a number of variables, fixed number of variables. When you go to start an organization, you start a company, sometimes you don't even know what the variables are. And even if you do know what the variables are, you don't know which ones are important, which ones aren't important initially. And so one of the most important kind of salient traits for entrepreneurs is the ability to go in and eliminate all of the excess variables that don't matter and focus on what are the 2 or 3 or 4 things that are going to be most impactful for you hitting your goals. I think that same entrepreneurial mindset that you see great startups employing, I think that applies out to really to any great IT project, any major change that someone's trying to roll out. It's just so much harder with a startup because literally no one's going to tell you what you need to figure out when you're starting a company.
Yeah, and so if we apply that to higher ed, I've been in that situation where a school is trying to launch a new degree program, and they may have a preconceived idea of who their target audience is or who's going to respond really well to this new degree offering. Let's say it's a new master's in science. So could this kind of work to our favor to help eliminate some of those hypotheses we make about our target audience, or maybe our hypotheses or the variables that we're introducing anytime we launch a new program at a school? I know it's a bit of a reach from what you just described, but is that kind of, in a way, does that relate at all or not?
Well, I think, whenever we demo our technology and people tell us, give us their feedback, one of the things they oftentimes miss, and then when we explain it, they're like, oh, that makes total sense, is that not only is Capacity here to answer questions for students and parents and faculty, But capacity is also here to help identify what are the questions that people are asking because they weren't able to get an answer in the other medium. So school goes through a new website redesign and everyone's all excited about it. Put capacity on there and see which questions did we not do a good job of surfacing, which areas did we bury in the menu that we really should have risen up to the top. Otherwise somebody could have found that information. We had one organization do a big web redesign, and they missed one section that they thought they were going to port over, and somehow between the big coordinating with the outside firm and the inside firm, our inside people who were working on it, they didn't have it. And the next thing you know, capacity was up and they started to get all these questions on a section that didn't get ported over. And they wouldn't have found that if they just looked at their Google Analytics or just looked at some of their logs. And so these are the types of things where capacity can help not only answer the questions, but give you that kind of key insights and intelligence around how do we create a better experience.
Yeah. Well, it comes again back to this notion of empathy and really understanding. We can try to predict through maybe keyword searches or Google Analytics, the types of questions people are asking to find content on your site. We can also try to predict or assume or synthesize traffic patterns throughout a website. Oh, these are the most well-trafficked pages, for example. So we should maybe raise them in the primary navigation, raise their visibility. But it's actually validating that because you're taking in real data from the human themselves, and in a way, like using your design to meet that empathy sort of where it's at, matching a redesign or matching a new initiative or matching your brand messaging to the types of questions and the things that capacity is pulling in for you.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole idea is that you just want to remove the friction from the experience and also remove the friction from the experience of the people on the other end trying to understand why people aren't getting the information that they need.
Wow. So do you want to talk price at all, or should we just go to the website to figure out price and put in a demo question? I'm curious if a university or a school is going through a big redesign, how much does it cost to plug this in?
Yeah, so we've the way our pricing model works is that we've got a bunch of different parts of the product that you can use. So it's one price if you use just the knowledge base and the help desk, but another price if you add workflows, guided conversations, or the app integrations, or we've got an upcoming release that we're doing around some of our database work. And so we can work within just about any school budget based on the scope that they want to try to roll out. But check us out. Go to capacity.com. I'll be happy to talk with you.
Okay, we'll take you up on that. Now, what's on the horizon? Obviously, you're not going to stop with these, particular set of tools, and you're going to add more as we continue to go. But what are some of the trends that you're seeing in the ed tech space or within the AI space? Where do you see this evolving? What's next?
So if you look at the history of education, you end up getting more and more personal over time, right? So my kids love to watch these reruns of Little House on the Prairie, right? And you watch these old shows, and it's still in old kind of grainy colors. They find that to be funny in a Netflix generation. But one of the things you look at, you see the old one-room schoolhouse, and that was amazingly advanced for that time, rather than people having to learn at home and be at the behest of how good or bad their parents were as teachers. And then you see that model move toward more of the classroom model, where you could try to target content more at one group's individual level. But we've seen a lot of cracks in that model now, where if you might have a 8th grade math brain and a 4th grade reading level, right? What grade should that person be in, right? If you ask me to put on my jump in my DeLorean and go into the future and say, what is education going to be like? I think the concept of fixed grades is going to be viewed very much as an anachronism going forward, where it's like, wow, that feels like something that should have happened out of a different time. So I think the whole thing is you're moving toward more and more personalized learning. look at the rise of places like nerdy.com. It's the largest online tutoring marketplace. I happened to be an investor there and was on the board for many years. They grew out of this desire for people to get one-on-one direct education. And so I see that personalization need applying within the classroom, but also applying outside of the classroom. Anything from applying for scholarships, applying for college, to automating the workflows behind the scenes. I see the future of education being so personalized, it will make today's education feel as archaic as dialing up would today.
Yeah, we need to move kids off of the conveyor belt and into their own personalized roadmap, into their own personalized mission, if you will. I could see that also applying to the way that we structure majors and the way possibly we have this hierarchy between bachelor's, master's, and postdoc work. So it's quite possible that you're declaring a mission or a concentration or a domain of interest, and then just pursuing knowledge within that domain at your own pace. It'll probably come back to credentialing and making sure that, employers, or I guess society at large, can say, oh yeah, well, they have an equal amount of education here, So having some standards, I guess, in place would be still probably appropriate. But the idea of personalization, I think, is one that I haven't heard. A lot of people are talking about the disruption of education, and disruption with an intent or interest around personalization. I think that's a very compelling idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a tale of two online education experiences here. So my kids were home during part of the pandemic, as many kids were, and they hated Zoom at home. Like Zoom is a 4-letter word to my eldest daughter, and I mean that in every way possible. Conversely, they love Duolingo, and they use Duolingo as an adaptive learning platform. It doesn't feel like they're in Spanish class; they're having fun, and so I think we saw the limits of one giant class for all people, all day, for all time. And we're seeing the benefits of adaptive learning. Back to what we're seeing over at Nerdy, I got really excited when they rolled out their SAT and ACT prep, where instead of having to study for the entire thing, you go and you take an adaptive learning assessment, and it's going to personalize the specific areas you need to go focus on, and thus save you a ton of time. I think you're going to see that pattern or that concept apply out across all of education. Awesome.
I feel like we could talk for hours. Thank you, David. Anything to maybe leave the listeners with? I know you've shared a lot, and many people will have to go back and refer to the notes and see exactly how they're going to pick this up and apply this to their organization. But any parting words or any continued advice that you might want to offer our listeners?
The last thing I just leave with is, now is the time to get started. You don't have to clean up before you take a bath. You don't have to have everything ready and perfect. Now is the time to go bring this technology into your org.
Love that. And you can do it at capacity.com.
Exactly.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Happy Hour podcast. For more higher ed specific resources, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, please visit unincorporated.com.